Crucifixion stands as the most brutal execution, a torment so excruciating it aimed to break not just the body but the spirit. It was designed for maximum pain and humiliation, leading to a prolonged, torturous death. Yet what Jesus Christ endured went even further, much further, and the cause of his death? It's not what most people think. Jesus' physical suffering started in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew what was ahead: the pain, the betrayal, and the crushing weight of carrying humanity's sin. It overwhelmed him completely. He began to sweat blood. It's called hematidrosis. It happens under extreme psychological stress, often in those facing imminent death. What happens is that intense anxiety causes the release of chemicals that break down the capillaries in the sweat glands. Blood mixes with sweat, but this process left Jesus' skin incredibly sensitive, and the fluid loss left him dehydrated and weakened. And it was just the beginning. The real physical trauma began during his interrogation. Dragged before Annas, Jesus was struck by a soldier simply for how he answered a question. From there, he was tied up and sent to Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. Ultimately, they sentenced him to death for what they called blasphemy, for declaring himself the Son of God. While blindfolded and beaten, Jesus endured blow after vicious blow. By dawn, he had already endured hours of physical and emotional abuse. Scourging was a brutal and inhumane punishment. Jesus was stripped of his clothing, tied to a post, and whipped repeatedly with a horrific weapon called the flagrum. The ends of these straps were embedded with iron balls, sharp metal fragments, bone pieces, or hooks. Each lash wasn't just meant to break the skin, it was crafted to tear deep into the flesh, leaving behind bruises, shredded muscles, and devastating damage to the tissues beneath. With each strike, the wounds grew deeper, sometimes exposing the spine through the torn flesh, and Jesus was hit over and over and over. But we can learn more about Jesus' suffering by examining the Shroud of Turin. Scientists counted around 360 dumbbell-shaped wounds that could have been made by flagrum. Undoubtedly, the Roman soldiers first used vergi. These wounds lie beneath the flagrum wounds. The pattern of these wounds implies that two soldiers flogged his entire body, sparing only his head, neck, and groin. The number of scourge impressions totals from 100 to 160, far exceeding the 39 lashes typically given under Mosaic law. But remember, Jesus was judged under Roman law. Since hematidrosis left his skin incredibly sensitive, the scourging turned into a torment far more excruciating. It not only tore his flesh, causing unimaginable pain, but also led to significant external and internal blood loss. Jesus would have been drenched in sweat, completely exhausted, with torn skin, and likely suffering from internal injuries. You can see on the shroud that he got serious blows to his chest. Blunt chest trauma can lead to very serious internal injuries. One of them is a slow fluid buildup around and in the lungs. Within hours, this gradual accumulation caused severe fluid loss, intense pain, and breathing difficulty. This critical condition is known as pleural effusion. But oftentimes, blunt chest trauma results in pneumothorax, or a collapsed lung, where air leaks into the space between the lung and chest wall, causing the lung to collapse, either partially or fully. So Jesus felt a shortness of breath. That may also be accompanied by sudden sharp chest pain. However, chest blows don't just affect the lungs. They can also impact the heart. The heart is encased in a two-layered fluid-filled sac called the pericardium. Trauma to the chest can cause fluid to build up between these layers. This buildup put immense pressure on the heart of Jesus, reducing its ability to pump effectively and causing sharp stabbing chest pain, a condition known as pericarditis. As a result of these injuries, these processes began to take effect in Jesus' body, slowly but relentlessly. These external and internal injuries were so painful that they led to a condition called traumatic shock, also known as injury shock. But Jesus lost a lot of blood and fluid during the scourging, which led to hypovolemic shock. In the case of shock, 5 main effects start developing in the body, which was the case for Jesus. The heart beats faster, trying to circulate the blood lacking. Blood pressure drops, which can cause fainting or collapse. The sympathetic nervous system activates sweat glands, causing sweating and a clammy feeling. The kidneys stop urinating to save any remaining fluids. Extreme thirst begins because the body seeks fluids to replace the lost blood volume. By the end of the scourging, Jesus' body was slowly shutting down, one system at a time. The early stages of shock had taken hold, and every moment was a battle for survival. After enduring such a brutal scourging, the Romans dressed him in a robe, pressed a crown of thorns onto his head, and placed a reed in his right hand, mocking him as the King of the Jews. The crown of thorns wasn't a simple circle. It was a horrific cap of thorns that covered his entire head. The shroud shows at least 50 puncture wounds piercing Jesus' scalp. The agony must have been unimaginable, since the human scalp has over 140 pain receptors per square centimeter. The placement of the crown likely irritated 2 major nerve branches in the head, leading to trigeminal neuralgia. This condition is known for causing unbearable, devastating pains. Imagine a pain so intense that even a gentle touch, a slight movement, or a wisp of wind can trigger it. Picture soldiers mocking Jesus, striking his head, causing thorns to dig deeper into his scalp, a place full of blood vessels, where even the smallest cut leads to significant bleeding. The Shroud of Turin shows numerous blows to his face. To make matters worse, when the soldiers removed his robe, they likely reopened the scourging wounds. So, the significant blood loss from these scalp wounds and the intense pain further intensified his state of traumatic and hypovolemic shock. Since then, the crown of thorns became a source of unbearable pain, tormenting him from that moment until his final breath. After all this, Pilate presented him to the Sanhedrin, who remained unsatisfied. Thus, after symbolically washing his hands of the matter, Pilate condemned the Son of God to be crucified. Most people believe Jesus carried the patibulum, the horizontal beam of the cross, weighing around 50 to 75 pounds. However, a newer study analyzed the bloodstains on the Shroud of Turin and the tunic of Argenteuil, combined with the dimensions of the good thief's cross. They believe Jesus carried the entire cross, weighing around 100 pounds. Whichever is the case, Jesus had to bear weight between 50 and 100 pounds while in shock for over 1/2 mile, climbing steadily uphill. Step after agonizing step, Jesus stumbled forward, but his strength began to give way. At this time, he was in a state of extreme exhaustion. His shoulders, raw and torn from the scourging, bore the weight of the heavy cross. The severe blood loss left him weak and dizzy, and the strain caused him to stumble and collapse repeatedly. The evidence from the shroud reveals the depth of his suffering. His knees were scraped and swollen, with significant lesions visible, especially on the right side. Scientists found dirt on his knees, nose and feet, confirming his repeated contact with the ground. He may have also hit his nose, as the shroud shows a nasal injury where the cartilage likely separated from the bone. There is a significant abrasion on the back, and signs that the right shoulder might have been dislocated. These falls, no doubt, worsened his state. The crown of thorns pressed cruelly into his scalp, causing sharp, radiating pain with every step. By this point, Jesus' body was in a state of moderate traumatic and hypovolemic shock caused by the tremendous loss of blood and injuries. His heart was racing, trying to pump what little fluid remained. By now, fluid had started to build up in and around his lungs. Every breath became increasingly difficult, and Jesus grew weaker to the point where he could no longer carry the cross on his own. The Romans became worried that he might die along the way. So, they pulled a man from the crowd, a bystander named Simon of Cyrene, and forced him to help carry the cross. At Calvary, the soldiers offered Jesus a bitter drink of wine mixed with myrrh, a mild, ancient painkiller, but he refused. Then they stripped off his garments. His clothes were stuck to his body, glued in place by the blood from the open wounds, which had dried and clotted into the fabric. It was suddenly pulled off. Imagine the searing pain you'd feel if a massive gauze pad covered your entire body and was suddenly ripped off. Here was Jesus of Nazareth, Forced onto the wooden crossbeam, his body racked with pain, and yet the worst was still to come. The patibulum had pre-drilled holes for nails. If a victim's wrists didn't align, the soldiers made them fit by dislocating their shoulders. And so it was for Jesus. The Shroud of Turin confirms that his shoulder joint was dislocated and pulled nearly 6 inches out of its socket. The soldiers nailed Jesus' hands to the patibulum with a huge square iron nail that measured about 15 centimeters in length. The Romans had different ways to crucify people, but the hand wound image on the shroud hint at 2 potential nailing locations, either through the thumb side of the wrist or through the upper part of the palm angled toward the wrist. Either way, the medical implications are the same. The median nerve is invariably damaged, leading to a condition known as causalgia. The pain was sharp, aching, intense, fiery, and unrelenting, and it radiated to other areas served by the same nerve. The damage was so severe it could partially paralyze his hands. This type of pain alone can easily put the body into traumatic shock. Once his hands were secured, the Romans secured his feet flat against the stipes, and his knees were bent at a striking 45-degree angle. The Shroud of Turin provides a heartbreaking detail here too. His feet were placed one on top of the other. A single nail was driven through a spot between the bones of the foot, called the second metatarsal space, and through the heel. The left foot was placed directly over the right, and another nail was driven through both feet. Though the soldiers avoided major arteries, the nails still tore through branches of the plantar nerves that ran through the foot, and just like with the hands, his feet exploded with an intense, sharp, relentless, burning pain that radiated up his legs, following the pathways of the nerves. With his knees bent and his legs forced into this terrible position, Jesus now had to rely on his thigh muscles to support his weight. Jesus' muscles cramped, his joints screamed from the strain, and his blood flow slowed, leaving his legs cold and numb. The crucifixion was an extremely painful and slow method of death, often lasting for days, but Jesus died after 6 hours. What had physically happened to him that led to his death so fast? What was the cause of his death? Some suggest that his death was caused by a ruptured heart. It's a poetic idea, but medically unlikely. Heart ruptures usually happen due to heart disease or heart attacks. These were extraordinarily rare in a young, healthy man living in 1st century Judea. The most popular belief points to asphyxia. In theory, the position on the cross is incompatible with breathing. To inhale, the crucified had to hang by the nails in his wrists, and to exhale, the victim had to push up on the nails in the feet. But there's a problem. Jesus' actions on the cross don't align with this theory. Remember, he was still able to speak on the cross, loudly crying out, bowing his head, and commending his spirit into the hands of the Father, which completely rules out the possibility of asphyxia. Since then, Dr. Frederick Zugibe has conducted live crucifixion experiments with volunteers, carefully monitoring their vital signs and blood chemistry under controlled conditions. Contrary to long-held beliefs, these volunteers experienced no breathing difficulties. Their blood oxygen levels, healthy. Their respiratory systems, completely functional. Dr. Zugibe also checked if the volunteers could lift themselves while on the cross. None could. So Dr. Zugibe's findings turned the accepted crucifixion narrative on its head. The long-held belief of asphyxiation fell apart. So what could have caused his death? Jesus told his disciples how he would die. He said, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." It indicates severe blood loss, not suffocation. That is a shock, so the most likely cause of death was hypovolemic, traumatic, and cardiogenic shock and their complications. These began to develop in Jesus' body after the scourging and reached its peak during the crucifixion. Hypovolemic shock gripped his body as blood and fluids drained away. Since the Last Supper, not a single drop of water had touched his lips. Thirst gripped him like a vice, an unrelenting primal need for water that would never come. His heart struggled to pump blood. His blood pressure dropped. Meanwhile, his pulse raced. His kidneys shut down. His skin turned ghostly pale. Each shallow breath a battle, as waves of dizziness pulled him closer to the edge. On the cross, the pain was endless. The nails, the crown of thorns, the scourging, his dislocated shoulder, and the severe leg cramps compounded his agony. This immense suffering triggered traumatic shock. Among the cascading effects came trauma-induced coagulopathy, a condition that wrecked his body's ability to clot blood. It may have hastened his death, and it also explains why blood flowed from the spear wound even after he was dead. As a consequence of the other types of shock, cardiogenic shock arose. The heart of Christ couldn't pump effectively anymore. These factors collectively caused respiratory failure and cardiac arrest, explaining why Jesus died within 6 hours on the cross. Dr. Frederick Zugebe said that if Jesus had a death certificate, it would likely state that the cause of death was cardiac and respiratory arrest resulting from hypovolemic and traumatic shock due to crucifixion. As the Sabbath approached, the Jews asked for the victims' legs to be broken to speed up their deaths. However, when the soldiers came to Jesus, they realized he was already dead. Instead of breaking his legs, one soldier pierced his side with a lance. This detail is even visible on the shroud. The spear penetrated deeply, slicing through his right lung and reaching his heart. This way, the fluid that had built up around his lungs and heart, and the blood that had not clotted flowed out. Thus, the blood and water serve as additional evidence that Jesus indeed died from cardiac and respiratory arrest due to shock. Most importantly, Jesus endured all this not because he had to, but because he loved you. It wasn't the nails that kept him on the cross, it was his love for you.